Easy. And we're live. Hey, welcome everybody to episode number, what are we on? 120 of Mirrorless Minutes. We do a lot of these shows. This week, Mike is not available. Mike is traveling for work, as he often does. So I reached out and plucked out of the ethos somebody that I've wanted to talk to and get on this show for a long time, and I'm glad I got to make it happen. And that is Bryan Minear. Bryan is, I'm going to let Bryan introduce who he is and what he does, and because he's going to do it better than me. So, hey, welcome aboard, Bryan.
Thanks, man. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate you reaching out.
Totally.
Yeah, so like you said, I'm Bryan Minear. Technically, I'm an official Fujifilm X photographer, so an ambassador for Fujifilm. Primarily a landscape, kind of fine art, cityscape photographer, I guess you would say. But I also do some commercial work, some lifestyle stuff, like a little bit of everything. My background's pretty shot a little bit of everything along the way.
Cool.
So yeah, do a little bit of everything.
Good deal. I'm glad to hear you say that you do a little bit of everything. I know coming up in photography, especially earlier in it for me, it was always about, focus on one thing, get really good at one thing, just be the one tool for the one job. And I never liked that. I felt like it was constricting or locking me down, pigeonholing me. So it's cool to see that, I'm not the only person that wanted to break out of that mold.
Well, it's interesting because I'm also a graphic designer and have been. So in college, I have a bachelor's of fine arts and graphic design, but I also minored in photography. College is really where I kind of fell in love with photography, with the darkroom process and shooting film and stuff. And then that kind of turned into, okay, I can use digital photos to help out the design stuff that I'm doing. So photography was never really, I never had a goal of being a professional photographer or anything like that. It was really all to aid the design stuff. And I feel like over the course of that, just figuring out who I am as an artist and a creative, I figured out, I can make money by shooting portraits and I can make money by shooting weddings. And so, yeah, you end up doing a little bit of everything because you're a poor college student. And then, you end up probably 10 years later, it was about 2015 when I realized, like, if I continue doing this, I'm just going to burn out and hate photography. And then that's where I kind of flipped the switch. Okay, I'm going to focus on landscape stuff, because that's where my passion has always lied.
Yeah.
When I was teaching myself like off-camera lighting via David Hobby and Strobus.com, like I would find an epic landscape, wait for perfect light, and then I would drop a senior in there and light them. You know what I mean? So I was always really after that dramatic kind of landscape scene, but it never paid the bills. So
yeah, it's funny how bills kind of get in the way of the creative process sometimes, or
yes.
And I guess in your case, it's definitely doing that. So you said your focus is primarily most of what I see on Instagram, which there's going to be a link in the show description for everybody. It's there. Go follow Bryan on Instagram. You won't be disappointed. That's why I want to start talking about that so quick. Your Instagram feed, I was talking to you before the show got started, and I was telling you that, I don't know, I follow 1,600 or 2,000 people, and there's always something new on my feed, and I can scroll 1,000 miles an hour. And if a photo blurs past that speed that's yours, I know that's one of Bryan's photos, back up. Do you want to talk about that a little bit? The process of how you developed your look, because your look is your look. This is Bryan's look. I know Bryan's look when I'm scrolling. And I personally am interested in hearing a little bit of the story about what went into developing that process. If you have a name for your process or a method or anything.
Just madness. It's it's been a long time in the making, honestly. Like, that's probably, other than how do I become a Fujifilm X photographer, that's probably the most asked question. Just how do you develop a style? And I think for me, it's, being a graphic designer and just always fully immersed in Photoshop, I'm constantly learning techniques. And I feel like much in the way that shooting different things, like we just talked about, shooting portraits or shooting this, like all of that has kind of led me to this point. Like at all times I'm accessing that information when I'm out, whether it's having to do with like the settings that I'm using or something. And I feel like the same thing's true with my design stuff. my design work influences my photography and photography design. So I think when it comes to my style, you know, I've had, gosh, just so many people that I've followed over the years. Just to name a few, if you want to check out, Miles Morgan is a photographer. You can find him on Instagram. Ryan Dyer, Dyar, and then also Mark Adamus, Adamus. Those are Marc Adamus. Those three are like, other than Ansel Adams, they're like huge influences on my work. Like I love their style. And so that's kind of always been, that's what I was aiming for the majority of the time as I'm kind of developing and trying to figure out. And they do a lot of like luminosity masking in Photoshop, focus stacking. So, you know, you have an image that's super sharp from front to back. And then they have a real signature kind of tonality in their images. And it's always been something that I've tried to replicate and then just never done really well. And so I think when I'm teaching workshops or when I'm doing anything, when it comes to like post-processing, I'm always like giving people like permission to experiment. Cause I feel like oftentimes, you know, you get on the petapixels and the photographers and it's always like, here's how you do photography correctly. And here's how you do photography the wrong way. Like, and it's super limiting because I feel like one of the most fun things for me when it comes to both shooting and processing is just figuring things out, playing around. Like I know Photoshop is like this endless time suck of a program, but like when you get in there and you learn these tools and how to do different things, like you end up honing and finding like, oh, I could do this a lot quicker this way. You know, there's a million different ways to do every given thing. So I think developing my style, it was a lot of, you know, looking at the people that I was being inspired by and then kind of trying to emulate that. But then also just kind of misstepping and not being able to get quite there. And then just kind of making something that was my own. And so I think that was that had a lot to do with it. That, and then just like learning the tools, you know, when it comes to camera raw Photoshop. And now I'm transitioning into using Capture One Pro for most all of my post-processing. I think it's just a knowledge of the tools and a comfortability of the tools. And like, again, you know, and we talked a little bit beforehand, like a lot of the times when I'm shooting landscape stuff, I'm bracketing my images because I know I have an idea, and this just comes from experience. Like you can't teach this, but like I have an idea when I frame up my composition, like I know where I'm going to take it in post before I even get it off the SD card. You know what I mean? Like you kind of have, okay, I'm going to merge these to one, you know, DNG file to maximize the dynamic range, or I'm going to process these 3 shots in Capture One and then open them up in Photoshop and kind of blend them together manually. Like I always kind of am pre-planning things as I'm shooting. And I think that's a big part of my process, is just having that creative vision that just comes from experience and kind of knowing your tools and then being able to follow through on that, which isn't, I know it's very ominous to say, oh, well, I'm by no means am I saying like, I know exactly what I'm going to do. A lot of times I'll have this idea of what I'm going to do and it goes a completely different direction, or I end up just using one of the exposures of the bracketed shots that I took, you know. It really just depends. But again, it all comes back to just knowing the tools and then knowing kind of where you want to take things. And so, I mean, that's the basis. I think if you want me to put my style in a little box, I think Ansel Adams is so influential for me. And obviously, like when I tell people I'm inspired by Ansel Adams, their first thing is like, well, he just shot black and white and everything I see from you is in color. And that's very true. Though that will be changing very soon. So stay tuned for that. But I think the thing that drew me to Ansel's work is how, you know, using a red filter and getting those just black skies that to me, I see his images and it's just like emotion inducing, these dramatic scenes. So to me, that level of contrast and like tonality is something that I've always been after. So for me, my style is very like dramatic, contrasty, and I'm a lot of landscape photographers go nuts with their dynamic range and like to, you know, bring up their shadows and pull down their highlights and like show you everything within a scene. Where I think one of the things that I love about Ansel's work is you have those really, really dark blacks and like bright whites. So for me, when I'm processing, I'm always hiding, trying to hide things away. Like I don't like to blow out my highlights, but I'm okay with hiding things away in the shadows. So that's kind of, those are kind of the rules that I live by. I like to get the blacks. I like you to see a little bit of texture. You know, say it's a grassy foreground or something. I want you to see just the slightest hint of a texture there, but like not completely just here's the green grass that was in front of me, you know? I think,
Right. Yeah, it's funny because your style, I think, bucks a really big trend right now in what I see in landscape photography. And it's exactly what you said. It's the full dynamic range of a scene. I mean, beyond what, you know, is even capable with a single shot. You know, obviously it looks like everybody's bracketing or they're maybe shooting with medium format camera we were talking about earlier, to be able to pull that kind of detail out. And yours has a lot of mystery in your shots. There's a lot of drama in your shots, and I tend to call people's style now where everything from the shadows to the highlights is 100% in control and represented. That's like happy drama because it's always bright and colorful, and you know, it is. I mean, and I do a lot of that myself, but yours has mystery and emotion and drama because of what you're not seeing, because you're hiding things away in the shadows. And it's cool to hear your side of this, of how that's been developed.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, a lot of times, like, by no means am I saying my way is the way to do it. You know what I mean? Like I follow so many different types of photographers because I want to be, I'm the kind of person that like wants to find out what's trendy and then do the complete opposite of it. That's just how I am in life. My wife could tell you a whole story there. I'm very, very punk rock. But like, I think there's something to be said about trying different things. You know what I mean? So even if you find a style that you like and emulate it for a little bit, just to figure out where you fit into that. You know what I mean? Like, I was against presets for the longest time just because it seemed to me like everybody was just, oh, preset and I'm done. Like, you know what I mean? You're not finding yourself. You're not finding your voice. But then like along the way, I kind of figured out presets are a great, for people that are willing to put forth the effort, presets are a great way to see how things work. You know what I mean? People can throw a preset on and then run through the curves and see how, oh my gosh, like he's tweaking like the red channel, the blue channel, the green channel, like, and seeing what's happening to create and I think that's what I'm all, if there was one thing that I could leave in my wake as a photographer, it would be just teaching people that like, the better you know your tools, the programs you use, your camera, like the more fun I think you're going to have as a photographer, because it just opens up so many creative doors.
Right. Yeah. It's a good lesson. You know, don't be afraid to experiment. I mean, we probably wouldn't have half the techniques that we have available to us now if somebody wasn't willing to go out and just give it a shot and just start playing with different methods and techniques and sharing that online.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I kind of talked briefly or mentioned medium format. I really do want to talk about that because, you know, this show has primarily been Olympus, and we're micro four thirds sensor. I mean, 90% of the people watching this or listening to this are going to be in that camp. And I personally have this big, huge curiosity and fascination with, you know, going well beyond the sensor size that I'm shooting with now and looking at something like medium format as an addition to the system potentially. And I know you have something like that probably really close to you sitting here at the moment. I'd love for you to talk about the experience of what it's like to work with that kind of a camera. Then hold that up again, stop talking so people can see what that monster is.
So we got a massive sensor, and I know it's hard without having anything to compare it to, but this sensor is 1.7 times larger than a full frame sensor. So quite large. It's it basically, put short, it means insane dynamic range and noise performance. I mean, that's basically what it boils down to. Like, I think if I could say, if there's anything to be said about like what Fujifilm does and what I have loved from that, what I have loved about them and their system since I started shooting with it, is just like the well, I can't think of the word right now. Just the interaction with the camera. You know, most all of their cameras with the new GFX, the big brother of this guy, the 100 megapixel that just came out, is the one exception, but that does not have these physical dials. But I have my shutter speed dial, my ISO dial, and if I had a lens on here, I would have an aperture dial on the lens. So the big drawing point, or the big draw to that, is you don't have to dig through menus for stuff. And you have, like, me coming from a film background of, you know, interacting with a film camera in the same way. They take a lot of nods from old cameras in their new designs. I just love having that. You know, I can look at my camera when it's not even turned on and know that I'm at, you know, 1/1000th of a second at f 2.8 at ISO, and I could change those really quickly. I don't know. There's just something about that. There's a feel thing. The camera just like completely melts away when it's in my hands, and I'm like there with my scene. So the beauty,
jumping into menus, you're literally, it's all tactile. It's all feedback from your hands.
The main things that you need are right there at your hands. And I think so. The cool thing for me, with this camera specifically, was the first medium format camera that they came out with. Like, from the first time that I picked it up, like, it just felt like a bigger XT2.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, and not that much bigger, but I mean, everything was still like, I picked up the camera and I was like shooting with it. There was no learning curve, which I think is pretty cool. And then for anybody that has knowledge of like the exposure triangle, like, you know, you show them where the dials are and they're like, okay, I can kind of figure my way out, you know?
Yep.
So I think for me, I mean, I've only had this camera for 3 or 4 days now. My lens is still on back order, so I haven't even gotten that yet. I haven't really been able to shoot with it, which is driving me crazy. But but I think the big draw for me is just, I've never had a problem with, like, this is a 50 megapixel. My cameras that I'm shooting with now, the X-T2 and the X-T3, are 24 and 26 megapixel. I've never had a problem with like not having enough resolution. Sure. But there's definitely, and I told you this before we got started, like, I've borrowed this camera like 1,000 times since they released it, as many times as I could without them yelling at me. I'm like, hey, can I borrow that thing again? Can I borrow that thing again? So I've shot with it a fair amount. And I think in the time that I've had with it, the one thing that I have noticed is just, I mean, shots that I would normally be bracketing with my X-T2 or X-T3, I'm not having to bracket because all that dynamic range is there. You know, being able to, I'm a big fan of like shooting intentionally, setting up a composition exactly how I want it. I rarely crop, like rarely. I'll straighten my horizons if I'm going fast and I don't, you know, get it right in camera, but like, I don't crop a lot. But with this thing, just the ability to be able to crop in to a scene is just insane. You know, you crop in halfway and I'm still at a resolution that I would be normally on my APS-C cameras. So it's just, it's mind blowing. There's a lot of doors that medium format opens up for sure.
Definitely, without a doubt. So you mentioned that the low light performance is pretty good. Have you done any kind of astro work with that? Any Milky Way shots?
No, that's the one thing. I have a friend in Utah. His name's George, and he's been shooting with the GFX for a while. This one, the 50S, and he's a big astro guy. And so like I look at his, and he's a guy that he's very purist. Like, he doesn't do a lot of Photoshop work, like exposure stacking and like heavy adjustments. And the results that he gets are insane. That he gets just, he shoots with, I think it's a Rokinon Cine lens, because it's it's a full frame lens that he has adapted to this. But it covers the sensor. I think it's like a 1.9. I think it's a 20 millimeter 1.9. So it's like a 15 or 16 millimeter full frame equivalent, like one f1 lens or something like that. So like for stars and stuff, it's just amazing. That's like one of the things I'm really most excited for, is shooting stars with this thing.
Right on. definitely. So we've been talking, quite a bit about your work and your style, and I'd love for people to be able to see some of your work without having to leave the show right away. Do you want to do an intro and kind of talk about your work?
Yeah, man. Let's see if I can do this without messing it up.
So when you do your screen share, I'm just gonna mute myself so you can just go ahead and talk away.
Okay. You good? Can we see this? We all good here?
Yep. Sure.
All right, sweet. Yeah, so I think now a couple of these, what I'm going to be showing you are shots that I've gotten here in Michigan or in the Midwest. Like, I think one of the things for me is lately I've been traveling a lot more, traveling to just different locations and really mixing it up there. But I think one of the things that me and all my kind of photography friends in the area, we always tout is just shooting here isn't easy. Shooting in the Midwest is tough because we don't have like the epic landscapes that they have in the western part of the United States and other places, So I think there's something to be said about being a creative here and making it work. And then one of the things that I love about that is, taking something so simple like this shot, working with my photo pills app to figure out where the sun's going up, getting the perfect like hazy morning to create like some depth and layers here in the middle of a field, like 5 minutes from my house. I think there's something to be said about that, because then you take all of that creative energy and you go somewhere like California or Oregon or Washington State, and it's just like everything is so easy. You go out there to shoot and it's just like, I don't know. I mean, it can still be complicated, but for the most part, I think if you're a creative here, there's just something really to be said about that and making something from nothing, as I often say. So like I said, this is a shot that I kind of planned for a while. With this particular tree, I had like maybe a week to 2 week window, depending on where I was in the field, that I could get it like this. And, it just so happened that I got the perfect timing on the perfect morning and everything kind of lined up, no pun intended. But I think it just takes that little bit of extra to again, going back to the style, some of the things I talked about, like having that creative vision and the forethought. Like there's nothing more satisfying to me than going out without a plan and coming home with like the shot that you never even thought you were going to get. But at the same time, planning something and seeing that thing through to the finished product is equally as satisfying, if not more sometimes. Here's another shot. Well, it's from like northeastern West Virginia, Blackwater Falls State Park. There's this series of 3 or 4 waterfalls called Ellicala Falls, I think. This is the first one. You can see kind of the walkway into the falls, and then it kind of proceeds down along the way. And we had been kind of forewarned by a friend that lives in the area to like watch for the swirls. So we were swirl hunting. And this is actually the second pass. We did this falls, me and 2 friends, and then worked our way down to 2 and 3 and didn't really find anything. And then on our way back up, we were like, let's give it another shot. And my buddy actually, he was like, oh man, look at this. It's right here swirling perfectly. And I got in there just perfect time, to get that nice. I don't remember how long this exposure was. It was probably close to 45 seconds or a minute. And that's another thing I'll just tout about the Fujifilm cameras is, I don't know what I know Sony doesn't, but I don't know where Olympus is at, but I can actually in body without a release, I can do beyond 30-second exposures. I can do 45 or 40, 50, 60, 2 minutes, all the way up to 15 minutes in camera, nice. which is really nice, because when you're shooting with ND filters, you get a reading off of the light meter. So I have people ask me all the time, like, how do you get your exposures right when you're working with ND filters? Is there an app that you use? And while there are apps that you can use, something nice is that I can just read my exposure meter on my camera with ND filters attached, and it's going to give me an accurate representation, which is pretty cool. So
this shot right here, the depth of field on it's pretty deep. Do you remember, is this I mean, it's a long exposure, so I'm assuming you didn't focus stack like a bunch of long
No.
exposures to do this. So
No, I don't focus stack hardly ever.
okay,
This is one shot, 10 millimeters, so it's like a 15 millimeter equivalent at f9.
gotcha.
So, oh, there you go. Exposure time was 10 seconds. I think the longer you got, the more blur you got here and the less kind of pronounced the swirl was. So a shorter exposure was a little better. But yeah, I think one of the things that I find, and this is something I like working with a smaller sensor, is on like full frame cameras and then also medium format cameras, like diffraction starts setting in at higher f-stops sooner. And so for me, I feel like that's a benefit of a small sensor is just overall sharper images, because you can stop down a lot more and not have that same kind of level of diffraction that you have with bigger sensors. Let's hop into this next one. So this is another, like, literally on my way to work. I'm lucky here where I live in Superior Township. Like, we have a lot of wetlands around, so there's a lot of fog certain times of the year. So yeah, just happened to be driving to work the back way and pulled off the side of the road at just this perfect row of trees and caught, just an awesome moment. This is an example of, not having any plan whatsoever. Just, I literally carry around way more gear than any normal person would at all times. Like, I have 2 bodies and 4 lenses with me at all times. But there's, I've gotten this kind of shot where it's like, if I didn't have my camera, I would literally hate myself. So there's just a solid example of, and I mean, this is very minimally edited in Capture One just for colors. This is, it's pretty much what you see is what I saw. And I mean, it's just amazing. And we'll hop into more travel. This is actually a shot. I love this because, let me flip back to my camera if I can really quickly. I love this because that is my tattoo. Nice. It is literally my scene. So, like, this is Eastern Sierras in California. It's right outside. If you follow this road all the way in, there's a lake called June Lake that's like east of Yosemite. And was there shooting a video promoting the new XT30 camera. And I've actually seen this once before, not with the snow on the mountains, but I was shooting a commercial gig for GMC, so I didn't really have time to shoot it as a landscape scene. So I knew, like, I had to get this while I was there. Nice. And I mean, this is just like very simple, 50 to 140, which is my 70 to 200 equivalent lens, Okay. Nothing really technical about it, other than there were posts, like snow posts all along the road that I cloned out just because I'm that guy, like, that has, I have, not only do I have symmetry brain, but I also have, like, I don't want stupid crap in my shot brain.
Yep.
Tidy it up a little bit.
From Liana in the chat room. She wants to know what your favorite Fujifilm setting is, if you have a favorite Fujifilm setting.
Like, oh man, setting. That could mean so many things.
Like a film emulation, Liana?
Oh, if we're talking like film simulations, then I have a couple. Like, one of the things that I recommend to people is shooting in black and white. Like, a lot of times the nice thing about these cameras is you have some custom settings, so I can flip between several that I've already pre-made. Okay. So one of the one that I shoot with the most is classic chrome film simulation, and then I'll go -2 on my shadows and highlights, because that's giving me like a more accurate representation of the dynamic range as I'm shooting. Okay. Like, of what dynamic range that I have. And then if I want something more contrasty, then I have that same, like, classic chrome, and I'll go +2 on the highlights and shadows, just so I have more of a contrasty image. If I'm chasing my son around shooting, I'll use that a lot. And then another one of my favorites is Acros with a red filter, which is basically a black and white film simulation, and it's also simulating a red filter over the lens. So you get, like, really dark blues. Yeah, black skies. And that's really fun, because I think, and this is something I do a lot, like, I don't process a ton in black and white. But shooting in black and white when you're actually just out looking for like tonality and interesting light is sometimes, I don't know, there's just something about seeing like that, and then I'll get back and I'll process it in color. Like, but there's something different shooting in black and white does to your brain. Yeah,
you're not distracted by color. You're just looking at tonal.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think it's yeah, I don't know. There's just something to be said about that. It's something that I do a lot. But those are probably my favorite couple film simulations, I would say. So this is from the same trip. These 3 images are all from that eastern. This is just a little bit further north from June Lake. It's a lake called Mono Lake, and there are these crazy, it's called tufa, but it's like a calcium carbonate material that just builds up, and it's just like this alien planet. It's absolutely unreal. I was there with a film crew. Like I said, we were shooting something for a new camera, and we were here for the sunset, and I got some really cool shots, but I was like, well, guys, we're gonna have to stay a little while because this is the astro spot. Like, this is gonna be perfect. And I could see like some disappointment on their faces, but at the same time, like, they were down, and the results that we got were just amazing. Like this, I've never gotten like a star reflection like this when I've been shooting before. And that's like something I've always wanted. So like to be able to finally do that, and in such a unique place, like this glow back here is a town, obviously, that's kicking up noise pollution. And there was just this perfect thin layer of clouds over top that gave that nice pink like contrast against the blue sky. It was just, I don't know, it was just one of the coolest experiences, just being there. Brutally cold. This was late January, early February of this year. And yeah, it was just amazing. And the cool thing was, this was kind of the shot that I was after, but like, depending on how much the wind was blowing, you would get variations in the blur of the foreground. So I got several different, like, just really unique shots based on just how the wind was blowing, you know? And those aren't things that I was thinking about at the time, really, but like getting back in post and seeing what I came up with, it was pretty cool. Like, kind of seeing that difference and taking note, you know, for the future.
The feeling that you've got in this shot, the feeling is not that it was cold and blustery and miserable. It's like, it just looks like I should be there in shorts and a t-shirt. Just,
I know. Well, it was pretty warm when we were there for the sunset, but like, you know, as soon as the sun goes down, I mean, you can see there's a little bit of snow still back here on the mountains and stuff. Like, so it was still pretty cold. And I mean, the Tioga Pass into Yosemite, which is literally like 5 minutes from here, like the eastern entrance to Yosemite, was closed because the snow was so high. So like, couldn't have even gone to Yosemite if I wanted to. But yeah, it cooled down really quick. We have a couple shots of me bundled up pretty tight. Yeah. My nice North Face jacket with a hoodie underneath, with a shirt underneath that. This is everything that I wanted from the entire trip. Everything else on top of this was just cake. I've been wanting to go to Alabama Hills for a really long time, and we hit it on our way north to this stuff. But it was really overcast. The video guys got some really cool content, but I didn't really get the shots that I wanted. And so there was actually a storm. We shot this, and there was a storm coming in. We were staying in Mammoth Lakes, and there was a storm coming in, and they were saying it could possibly dump like a foot of snow, and at least. And we were in one of the video guys' Prius. We were like, maybe leaving earlier is better. So I was like, okay, so what do you guys think about, I mean, and this whole trip is me like manipulating. Can you hear me still?
Yep, totally can.
Okay, cool. All right. My audio dropped out. I just wanted to make sure. But yeah, this whole trip was like literally me making sure that the video guys were getting what they needed, but also like manipulating them into doing whatever I wanted to do.
Good job.
So, so I somehow talked them into leaving at like 3 a.m. to drive. We had to pass by Alabama Hills as we left back to LA, but I was like, let's just leave early. We'll miss the snow. We'll potentially hit one last spot where we can get sunrise at this place and, you know, like, and then head out and be closer. And so totally manipulated them. So what ended up happening was we got there, we hiked out to this spot, which is an arch that we wanted to shoot, Mobius Arch. And I wanted this, like, this is all that I wanted, was the sun hitting the mountain face, you know, kind of illuminating the rocks and the layers in the foreground. So what ended up happening, actually, I'll pull up this shot because I just posted this to Instagram. This is all we got for the sunrise. Like, so this is a little further back. I think for that shot I was showing you, I was standing out on this rock. Like literally the sun popped through enough to do this magic and this for like 45 seconds to a minute. And then it went completely overcast again. And I got this one shot and then I was like, well, crap. I guess that was cool. Like I was hoping for a little bit more. So we ended up, it ended up just graying out. We set up, they wanted to do a couple of interviews. So they set up, you know, and I was sitting down here just underneath where the camera's pointed. And we set up to do some interviews with this as a backdrop. And, you know, I'm talking, I ended up setting up this camera doing a time lapse because I could see that the clouds were kind of breaking a little bit. So like I set up a camera to do a time lapse while I was doing my interviews just to catch these little pops of light as they broke through, and like ended up just with the most magical, you know, especially this right here, this little hit right across the rock face. Like, but it was just amazing to see as the clouds moved and the sun would break through at, you know, particular times, like how it would light up the landscape. And so it was like,
is this a frame from the time lapse?
It's, well, yeah.
Sick.
Yep. It is. So like, I just set it up and had it going. And then when I took breaks in my interview, I would turn around and pull my camera up and shoot a couple things too.
Yep.
But like, thankfully I had the time lapse going to be able to catch this. Nice. Otherwise I would have totally missed it.
That's so rad.
Yeah. So that's another reason why I like shooting or carrying around multiple bodies, is just,
sure.
For one, I like having a telephoto on one and a wide angle on the other, just to limit the amount that I'm changing lenses. If there's any downside to mirrorless, it's dust on the sensor.
Sure.
You know, not having that protective layer of the mirror. But like also I like to do time lapses too. And I like to just have that freedom of, you know, me shooting with one camera and then to know another camera is getting something completely different is cool. And then I guess lastly, we could talk about this. This was pretty insane experience. Was in New York City for Photo Plus last October. And we had a friend hook us up to do a doors off helicopter ride. One sunrise. So we woke up at like 4 a.m. or something like that and headed out to New Jersey and just did, and like, I've never shot from a helicopter before, so I had no idea what to expect. But like, you know, so I was shooting it like, just because I didn't want to get down. I mean, the helicopter was shaking like crazy. I was shaking because, I mean, you're hanging off a helicopter. Adrenaline is like blowing through your body. It's freezing, ridiculously cold. And then the helicopter's shaking. So like, I had no idea what my minimum shutter speed should be.
Sure.
So I believe, let me look what this shot was. I had somebody actually, I think Fujifilm just posted this shot the other day, and they posted the settings, and somebody was like, why is it? I'm pretty sure it's a 6400 ISO. Of course, It doesn't say right there. Let's see. Yeah, 6400 ISO. And somebody was like, why were you shooting this at 6400 ISO? Like, wouldn't it have been way better to shoot lower? And I was like, well, duh. But I also didn't want to land and then realize that all my shots were blurry. Right. So, but to me, this is like the perfect representation of why the benefits of going with a smaller sensor. You know what I mean? Being able to accomplish this at ISO 6400 in the air, like freezing, shaking like crazy, and still coming out with like the shot, the one shot that I wanted, you know, that I envisioned when we decided we were going to do a doors off helicopter ride. Like, yeah, I don't know. It just, there's something to be said about knowing your gear, knowing, okay, you know, I trust that it's going to be able to do this and pull it off. And then, yeah.
So cool. So
yeah, that was insane.
We do have another question. Joshua was wondering, Capture One or Lightroom, and why?
So I'm going to say I'm about 90% in Capture One now. For me, it handles Fujifilm. Like, so Fujifilm APS-C cameras, medium format is a different story, but the Fujifilm APS-C cameras all have an X-Trans sensor. It's their kind of own sensor technology that they've developed. Adobe hasn't been the best at demosaicing the files and then sharpening the files. Like, that's really the big complaint from the Fujifilm community, is it's just not good. Like, I don't sharpen anything. Number one, I've never used Lightroom. I hate Lightroom. I'm old school. I use Adobe Bridge as my file viewer, open things up in Adobe Camera Raw, and then to Photoshop. Like, that's my process. I don't use any Adobe sharpening in Camera Raw. I turn all that off and I do all my sharpening manually in Photoshop. It's called a high pass technique if you want to Google it. It's really simple, even if you don't know Photoshop, but it's really powerful and lets you kind of target your sharpening at certain areas. So you're not just like globally sharpening an image. I think that's one of the biggest like things that people do wrong, is just sharpening slider and I'm done.
Yeah.
But so Capture One is amazing when it comes to Fujifilm files specifically, between demosaicing and sharpening. And then they also have the film simulations baked in now to the program. And they are like spot on, dead on what you get in camera. I've done some comparisons to like JPEG film simulation in camera versus edited raw and Capture One with that film simulation. And they're exactly the same. Whereas Adobe's representations are like, they're kind of there, but they're not really there.
Right.
So I'd say Capture One for me, the one reason that I can't go Capture One 100% is because it doesn't let you merge exposures yet. I'm hoping eventually they'll get there, but so that's when I want to like take bracketed shots and put them together into one. I still have to do that with Adobe stuff. So,
yeah.
But Capture One is definitely, and I mean, they have a free express version for everyone to try it out. They also have a migration workspace that kind of sets it up similar to Lightroom for people that are wanting to transition. But it's just super powerful. Like, the software, it can be confusing, but like once you kind of figure out where things are and how things work there, it's so much better than Lightroom.
Right. It's funny. Adobe better watch it. Everybody's right on their heels big time. I mean, I've kind of transitioned really heavy to on one. I mean, I'm still in Photoshop for some things, you know, I'm an anti power line and telephone pole guy. So, you know, those tools, the content aware fill and patch tool and things like that are great. But just for the way that the Olympus files are handled with on one, it's like, man, why am I even messing with Lightroom anymore? And it sounds like Capture One's the same way. It's just Adobe's. They better watch it.
I feel like they're in for a rude awakening. I know you probably saw just a couple of weeks ago, they announced that they were raising the prices, like doubling the price for just like their basic photography plan, I think. Like Photoshop and Lightroom, I think a couple of weeks ago. And then they quit, like they got backlash hard. And I think within like a day or two, they kind of reverted back to what it was. So I don't know if they're still planning to go forward with that, but they're going to have a lot of unhappy people if they do. I know for a fact.
Yes, they sure are. They sure are. Well, look, we've hit like the 45-minute mark. I won't keep you any longer than I have to on here. I just want to huge thanks for having you come on the show. I'd love to have you back on again in the future sometime, especially to talk about some of your travels, because I know we touched a little bit on your travels and you are definitely a well-traveled guy and you have a lot of great images that show that as well. So maybe we can have you back on again in the future sometime to talk about that. And maybe we'll talk about the medium format in the future too. If you get some shooting, if you can get some lenses for it to shoot with.
I know, right?
We'll make that happen. So again, thanks a lot, everybody. Just check out the show notes. Bryan's link to his Instagram account is there, and I again highly recommend you give him a follow. You won't be disappointed. And I guess that's it. If there's anything else you want to share with anybody, if there's anything you want to point them to, just go ahead and holler. What do you got to say?
Thanks for having me, man. This was fun. Oh, absolutely. Anytime you want me back, just say the word. I'll be back. Plenty to talk about for sure. Yeah, just follow me. I'm at Bryan Minear everywhere, and I love chatting about gear. So just slide into the DMs.
Right. Good deal. All right. Thanks again, everybody, for watching. Tune in a couple of more weeks, and I think Mike might be back on the show, and we're working on another guest. Should be fun. Talk to you guys later. See ya.